Alrighty, everybody. It's time for another episode of the Michael Shermer Show. I'm your host, Michael Shermer, the publisher of Skeptic magazine. You can get your latest issue here at skeptic.com/magazine. Education matters. Boy, does it ever. That's our latest theme. The next one after that is health matters. And in fact, my guest today has a excerpt from his new book in our next issue. So you want to go to skeptic.com/magazine to subscribe, or you can go to a local bookstore. And if you want to give the podcast and the society a little love, go to skeptic.com/donate. We are a 501c3, so you can deduct that from your taxes. All right, my guest today is a founding member and fellow of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, Michael Greger. He's a physician, New York Times bestselling author, and internationally recognized speaker on nutrition, food safety, and public health issues. He has lectured at the Conference on World Affairs, testified before Congress, and survived, and was invited as an expert witness in the defense of Oprah Winfrey in the infamous meat defamation trial. I remember that. In 2017, Dr. Greger was honored with the ACLM Lifestyle Medicine Trailblazer Award. He's a graduate of Cornell University School of Agriculture and Tufts University School of Medicine. His first book, How Not to Die, became an instant New York Times bestseller, and as you can see, he's still here, so he's apparently following what was in the book. He's also the author of How Not to Die Cookbook, How Not to Diet, How Not to Diet Cookbook, and How to Survive a Pandemic. He has videos on more than 2,000 health topics freely available at nutritionfacts.org. I watched a bunch of them before today's show, with videos and articles uploaded every day. All proceeds from his books and DVDs, speaking engagements, and so on are donated to charity. Here's the new book, How Not to Age. This is the scientific approach to getting healthier as you get older. As you can see, it's a tome. Oh, man. And how many endnotes? 8,344 endnotes I counted as the last one on the last page of the book. Michael, nice to see you. You brought receipts with your research here, I see.
Absolutely, always. In fact, the book started out with 13,000, but it was twice as long as they had published it. So I had to cut it down, turn the other half into videos. But it was at Cornell when I first read Skeptic magazine 30 years ago at the Alternatives Library at the law school there. So,
oh, wow. Okay. That's good to know. So
I'm honored to be here.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. So I see the book is dedicated to your great Aunt Pearl, 1911 to 2015. So you have longevity in your genes. No wonder you're interested in this topic. So let's just start there. Give us the kind of a broad overview. How'd you get interested in this whole subject of death and dying and aging and diet and all that?
It was really actually my grandmother, who, I was just a kid when my grandmother was sent home in a wheelchair to die. She was diagnosed with end-stage heart disease, already had so many, bypass operations, basically run out of plumbing, get so scarred up inside. Confined to a wheelchair, crushing chest pain. Her life was over at age 65. But then she heard about this guy, Nathan Pritikin, one of our early lifestyle medicine pioneers. And what happened next was actually detailed in Pritikin's biography. It talked about Frances Greger, my grandmother. They wheeled her in, and she walked out. Though she was given her medical death sentence at age 65, thanks to a healthy diet, was able to enjoy another 31 years on this earth, till age 96, to continue to enjoy her 6 grandkids, including me. So that's why I went into medicine, why I practice lifestyle medicine, why I started nutritionfacts.org, why I wrote How Not to Die, why all the proceeds from all my books donated directly to charity. I just want to do for everyone's family what Pritikin did for my family.
Nice. For those people who read books by their titles only, you're not claiming you can get people to live forever and that you can actually reverse aging and live to be 2,000 years old.
That is correct. Just as my last book, How Not to Die, was not about living forever. It's not how to not die, but how not to die, as in prematurely, in pain after a long chronic disabling illness, right? So How Not to Age is a similar premise. It's not about immortality, but how to age with grace and vitality rather than suffering the ravages of infirmity and disease.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the statistic you had in there, the survey of, how long would you like to live?
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, so people would say in what, 85, I think was it, or
So it's
something
right,
like that.
85, 120, 150, or indefinitely.
Right. And so most people thought, well, I don't know, 85 seems about right, but they're probably thinking, but I don't want to be 90 and, in a bed, unable to move and think.
Right. So then they rephrased the question and reframed it as in guaranteed mental and physical health. And then all of a sudden the majority answered. So 2/3 had said 85, but then the majority switched to indefinitely. And so that really gives, that's a great illustration of this health span concept, rather than not just about years to your life, but adding life to your years.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a nice phrase. So give us these quick definitions. What is lifespan? What is longevity? The longest living member of a species is some other term, and so on. What do you guys mean by all those words?
Yeah, so health span is defined as the period of life spent in good health, which is defined as free of chronic disease and disability. What's the point of living longer if, you can't enjoy it vibrantly? So here in the US, for example, we're living longer in sickness rather than in health. So a 20-year-old in the 90s, for example, could expect to live about 58 more years on average, while a 20-year-old closer to today would expect to live about 59 more years. But the 20-year-old from the 90s could look forward might leave 10 of those years in chronic disease, whereas now it's more like 13 years. So it's like one step forward, 3 steps back. So we're actually living fewer functional years, defined as, being able to perform the tasks of kind of basic life activities, walking a quarter of a mile, standing or sitting for 2 hours without having to lie down, and standing without special equipment. So we're living longer, but we're living sicker, and we're not even living longer anymore. U.S. life expectancy peaked in 2014, started to decline even before COVID, thanks to the obesity epidemic, raising the specter of the first generation of Americans living shorter lives than their parents. And of course, COVID kneecapped us even further. And we are far down the list in terms of industrialized countries. I believe 43 last count, 43rd in terms of life expectancy. Yeah, we spend more on healthcare than anybody else. And so obviously, there's room for improvement.
Yeah, I have that passage here from the final paragraphs of your book. In terms of life expectancy, the United States ranked down around 27 or 28 out of the top 34 free market democracies. People in Slovenia live longer than we do. That was in 2010, down from ranking 20th in 1990. More recently, U.S. life expectancy dipped to 43rd in the world and is expected to drop to 64th by 2040, despite trillions of dollars on healthcare spent every year, more than anyone else around the globe. And the problem is in healthcare access, the Mayo Clinic estimates that nearly 70% of Americans are on prescription drugs. Wow. The problem is that those trillions of healthcare dollar spending aren't addressing the root cause. All right, so before we get to the root cause and all your specifics, just give us a 30,000 feet look at why do we have to age and die in the first place?
Fantastic question, right? And in fact, biologically, the fact that, for example, a fertilized zygote can turn into the human brain, probably the most complicated, system on the planet with, trillion neurons, I would seem to make, this anti-aging, the mission, kind of trivial by comparison biologically. Yet, it's been many, many decades. And though we've had success in laboratory animal models, few of these successes have translated out into human longevity, unfortunately. But it's certainly a highly active field. But in terms of why we age, why we exist, right, is we're passing along our genes. And once we've passed along our genes, we really just not evolution doesn't care that much. After we've done that, we've kind of accomplished our task. And there's kind of like the grandmother hypothesis where, if we live longer, we'll take care of the offspring and give them a greater chance of living. But really, it's all about hitting that finish line as quickly as possible. And of course, there's different life strategies among different species. But that's why something like, there just isn't any selective disadvantage to something like Alzheimer's disease, because aging is a rather novel concept, kind of in the animal kingdom, even among human beings. I talk about some of these public health statistics, back in the 1700s in London, the average life expectancy 16 years old because of early life mortality. And so it's all about just making it long enough. Then, who cares if your arteries clog up? Who cares if your brain declines? Because by then, you've already kind of done what you came here to do. And there's something called this antagonistic pleiotropy, this interesting idea where certain genes have benefit early in life, but actually detriment later in life. So, for example, this amyloid protein, which may play a role in Alzheimer's dementia, actually has antimicrobial properties, decreasing the risk of childhood meningitis. And so that's why we would select for this devastating mechanism, because, infectious disease, that's the kind of our greatest threat historically, evolutionarily. But now we're left with these mechanisms where now we have antibiotics, but we still have these mechanisms that may hurt us kind of later in life.
Yeah. I think a Richard Dawkins approach to the selfish gene model of evolution, our genes are immortal. Our bodies are just survival machines that the genes need to get to the next generation. So once you've reproduced yourself, let's say in your late teens, early 20s in the ancestral environment, and then you get your offspring into their late teens, early 20s, you're pretty much done, maybe a little longer for grandparenthood, maybe get into your 40s or 50s would be good, but that's about it. Natural selection doesn't really care about you after that. I'm saying that in some anthropomorphic way. Of course, it's not caring at all. And so, but after that, then there's no selection for genes that would have any reason to keep you going. What is your sense about the research on to what extent the aging process is things falling apart just randomly, entropy, or actually programmed to fall apart in some deterministic way?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. These are highly debated topics within kind of anti-aging medicine. Is this just, is this the car rusting? And that, no matter what you do, eventually you're just going to kind of rust out. We talk about the buildup of kind of dysfunctional proteins. Different proteins have different half-life, some of which, like the crystalline, transparent proteins in our lenses, may last a lifetime, never get replaced. Certain collagen is there, has kind of half-life of decades. And so eventually we're going to need that cataract surgery regardless, if we ended up living long enough. And so it's if one really wanted to have this kind of longevity moonshot of really trying to dramatically extend human lifespan, you would not just have to slow down the rate of decline, but actively regenerate tissues, actively get rid of some of this some of the cross-linking proteins with these advanced glycation end products, which just create these complexes which normally we can't get rid of and would just kind of accumulate with age. But there certainly are processes within the body, such as autophagy, that can clear out some of the cellular debris, kind of the housekeeping process, which we can boost or suppress by some of the kind of diet and lifestyle changes. But given the fact that, the longest living, validated human lifespans were, in the early 120s, we really don't see much of a bell curve beyond that. One wonders, without some really kind of revolution in our understanding of biology, whether we'll significantly push past that.
Right. So this appears to be an upper ceiling, say 120, that no one has ever gone past, or if somebody did, it's so rare that it's meaningless. So what we want to aim for is for in terms of medicine is getting that average lifespan higher at a higher quality life. So what is it right now in the Western world, in America? And
So we got up to about 78, 79, and unfortunately have been kind of creeping down over the last few years. But that's you know that's
and for men and women combined, there's a difference in.
Yeah, no. So for men and women combined on average, currently Singapore has taken over for Japan as the country with the longest life expectancy, but it's still just early 80s.
Yeah. Remember, I was researching my book, Heavens on Earth, on the scientific attempts to achieve immortality. I met a lot of really interesting people. I'm sure you know some of these. We're going to live forever. Aubrey de Grey, the first person to live 1,000 years is alive today. And it's like, and then I hung out with him once at a conference, and he was drinking a lot of beer, and I thought, oh, maybe beer is beer the key? That would be nice because I like beer, but I have a feeling that's anyway.
Probably not the secret.
But then they say, Shermer, don't you want to live to be like 1,000 or 500 years? I'm like, just get me to 90 without Alzheimer's, get me to 100 without cardiovascular disease. Just take it one step at a time. Let's not worry about this living forever thing, because then that gets into all kinds of social, political questions, overpopulation and who's going to take care of all these old people and so on. Forget that. Just help people tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, who's getting the treatment?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. And also, I think it's also good to clarify that when we're talking about, the average lifespan of Americans decreased 2 years since COVID, I guess. But that doesn't affect you if, you don't have COVID, or if you're not on opioids and you have an addiction, or you're not obese. This doesn't affect you personally. We're just talking about statistical averages.
Correct. Right. And, when we're talking, this is life expectancy from birth. If you've already made it to 50, then your life expectancy is significantly longer. Made it to 60, already made it to 70. You can look at these kind of life immortalization tables and see that it's that it's not like, you're 76 and you're like, oh, average life expectancy is 78. I've only got 2 years left. That's not how it works.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So another striking sentence in your book is that no one dies from old age. What? I hear about this all the time. He died of old age.
Yeah, so based on a study of 14,000 consecutive autopsies, centenarians, those who live to be over 100, even those who appear to be in perfect health, their physicians thought so, everybody thought so. On autopsy, every single one was found to have died from disease, most commonly heart disease, which is also the number one killer of men and women in general. And so that really raised the question, well, wait a second, if everyone's dying from disease, and why wasn't, my approach with how not to die, where I just go through the top 15 killers, talk about the role diet and exercise may play in preventing, arresting, reversing our top 15 killers. Why wasn't that all the longevity book anyone needs? Well, it's the recognition that aging is a risk factor for most of our leading killers. Yes, having a high cholesterol can as much as, multiply your risk of heart disease as much as 20-fold, but a 80-year-old has 500 times the risk of a heart attack compared to a 20-year-old. And so aging, so there's this exponential increase in these age-related diseases like Alzheimer's and cancer risk and diabetes, heart disease. And so if one could slow down the pace of aging, then we could potentially reduce the risk of all these diseases at the same time. And so there's estimates that even if all cancer was cured, we'd really only increase life expectancy by a few years. That's because, well, if cancer doesn't get you, well, then, heart disease, the next one down the list is going to get you. And so by attacking aging as an issue, we may be able to kind of increase longevity and health across the board.
So that statement, no one dies of old age, dying of old age was just a line to put on the death certificate of, we don't know what the cause was, but he was 102, so obviously it was something in there, or a bunch of systems that all fell apart at the same time.
Yeah, in fact, most, I mentioned the most common cause of death of men and women is heart disease, but actually the most common way you die from heart disease is something called sudden cardiac death, meaning you don't even know you have heart disease. These are people without a diagnosis of heart disease, yet die within a few hours of first symptoms. More likely in in women than men. And so that's why prevention is the key, because, an ounce of prevention is way more than a pound of cure, since there is no cure for dead.
Right. We'll all be there a century from now. Yeah, you wrote, even if all forms of cancer are eliminated, the average life expectancy in the U.S. would only go up about 3 years. So, yeah, obviously there's all these other factors. Okay, here's another line. Only about 18% of people can be described as undergoing successful aging. Studies have found the prevalence of multi-morbidity, the coexistence of multiple chronic diseases, ranges between, 55% and 98% among older individuals. And when does that begin? When do you start counting somebody as older? You have age 85 here. Is that where the...
Well, so usually 85 is where the literature talks about the oldest old. Typically older men and women, they're talking about age 65, though you'll see studies talking about older men and women at age 50.
Okay.
But typically middle age is defined in the literature as 45 through 64.
Oh no, I'm past middle age. I've been calling myself a middle-aged white guy for years now, and I'm 69. Oh boy. Okay, so continuing. By age 85, more than 90% may have at least one disease, and on average about 4 diseases. And just like 85% of cancer patients tend to overestimate their survival, so too do those with other chronic diseases. Those suffering from heart failure or chronic obstruction lung diseases like emphysema are about 3 times more likely to die within the subsequent year than they predicted. Right, so I'm just kind of picturing this curve that just drops off in your, say, mid-80s. I mean, it just goes along and assuming you don't have some weird early disease or run over by a truck or something. The body's pretty good at keeping itself going until around the mid-80s.
Although, of course, it depends on, simple, basic, common sense lifestyle factors, such as not smoking, not being obese, regular exercise, eating more fruits and vegetables, can mean the difference, potentially between a decade of life expectancy. So we do have some control over that. Only about 25%, based on studies of identical twins, only about 25% of the variability in lifespan between people is thought to be genetic. And so we may have some control over the majority of which. And most of that is really just the basics. I know the book is huge and goes way into the weeds, and that's really for the, nerds out there who want to, do all the little, marginal things at the edges. But, that's why, the conclusion of the book, where it's really taking a step back and say, look, it's really the basic stuff will get you, 80% of the way there.
Yeah. Well, okay. So what are the major factors that cause us to age? Just go through those.
Well, so I talk about the aging pathways, which are based on the hallmarks of aging. And, we can go through them. But these kind of most...
I got the screenshot from your marvelous video on this of the genomic instability, telomere.
Oh yeah. Although the hallmarks, they're famous kind of landmark paper. And so the most promising pathways for slowing aging are boosting the anti-aging enzymes and hormones, which is AMPK, FGF21, sirtuin, telomerase, while suppressing the pro-aging enzymes and hormones, mTOR, IGF-1, then decreasing glycation, inflammation, oxidation, senescence, while maintaining autophagy, our telomeres, and our kind of epigenetic clock. These are all kind of fancy, sciencey names but I really do try to kind of break it down into kind of easily understandable, doable, practical takeaways in terms of kind of what we can do in terms of lifestyle and diet to change the pace of all the above.
Yeah, okay, so let's go through those one by one. So genetics. How come my doctors always ask me about my family history if genetics is not that huge a factor?
Well, not that huge a factor in longevity, but a huge factor in so many other causes of morbidity. Although, bad diets run in families too. Not exercise doesn't run in family. Running doesn't run in family. So it's hard to kind of tease that out. But there certainly are some conditions which are, just straight Mendelian, very clearly genetically, so if you have a parent with Huntington's or something, it's very much different. But, we want to, it gives us a sense, even if it's not genetic, what people in your family are dying of, and regardless of whether it's diet and lifestyle, these are the kind of things that the physician wants to have in the back of their mind when they're, looking over your labs.
Yeah, okay, you said something interesting there. Running doesn't run in your family, so there might be a genetic component and also obviously an upbringing component. To what extent our family exercises, our family eats healthy, this is what we do. How do you as a researcher tease apart the causal variables there? Is it the genes that drive people, that some people just love to exercise and others don't, and I get that from my parents? Or because my parents always exercised, then they inculcated that into my lifestyle and so forth?
I guess one of the most surprising things I actually learned in researching this book was the exercise component. The kind of surprising, the role in life extension of exercise is surprisingly a matter of debate in the literature. And it's because certainly, observational evidence very clearly associates exercise with longevity, but there's socioeconomic factors. You can tease those out by looking, for example, at those, instead of leisure time exercise, look at occupational exercise. Those manual laborers tend to live shorter lives. Again, these confounding socioeconomic factors. What we do know, physical activity, there are overwhelming health benefits, improving muscle mass and strength and balanced mobility, decreasing the risk of falls. We have interventional trials where we can randomize people to exercise, and we can see improved mood and cognition and improved artery function, erectile dysfunction, insulin sensitivity, on down the list. But when it comes to lifespan, the question is whether or not it's the genetic predisposition to exercise rather than the actual exercise itself. And what raised the question in the minds of researchers were two mind-blowing experiments, one of which was done on rats, where they selectively bred rats for greater or lesser physical endurance. The rats that with bred to be greater endurance, and more physically fit. Is it really survival of the fittest? Let's find out. Lived longer than the rats bred with less fitness. But then you give them running wheels so they can voluntarily exercise, and what happens? It cuts their lives short. Both of them live shorter lives when they actually get to kind of put that genetic predisposition to the test. And so they looked at identical twins, the rare cases of identical twins with discordant exercise habits, right? Typically, when identical twins leave the house, they tend to have remarkably similar habits kind of across the board. But in the rare cases where one identical twin, same genetics, exercises vigorously and the other identical twin does not, that's how we could tease out whether it's the genetic predisposition to exercise or whether the actual exercise itself. And so with the same DNA, would intense physical activity make a difference? Apparently not. The same mortality rates were found in identical twins, whether or not they exercise vigorously or not, really questioning the role of exercise and longevity. Again, though, tremendous health benefits of exercise, and don't want anyone to leave thinking otherwise. But the role in longevity, surprising, controversial, which surprised me when I was looking into it.
Okay, we have to tease this apart here because, all this massive research, I've read all this about exercise because I love exercise. I work out a couple hours a day, and I feel uncomfortable when I don't. I actually just enjoy it. But lucky me, I found, things I like to do outdoors and move my body. And you read all these things, well, it clears your arteries and it reduces stress hormones and, on and on, just, oxygen uptake capacity and muscle strength so you don't fall over and, on and on and on. How does that not translate into longevity?
Well, it certainly translates into better outcomes. So the problem with interventional trials on exercise is poor compliance. You see the same thing with dietary trials with interventions. And so there were actually attempts to randomize hundreds of individuals to exercise programs or not, to actually follow them over enough years to see if we would actually get a difference in lifespan. And it turns out you don't. But whenever you have an interventional trial that doesn't go the way you thought it was, you have to look at compliance. And it turns out that the only way you can do that kind of research is pre-select those who could vigorously exercise if indeed they ended up in the exercise group. So you get a really healthy group of folks, and then these folks end up in the placebo group, ended up exercising more than they would have than kind of the general population. And so the difference between those told to exercise and those told not to go out of their way to exercise was actually so small that, no surprise, we didn't actually end up with benefits after all. But you can, but in short-term studies, right? So, I mean, you can actually get people, just like in dietary studies, you can put people in a metabolic ward, lock people up basically in a hospital and force them to eat whatever you want. There are ways where now we can actually track exercise with these kind of accelerometers and and you can actually do studies where you can actually force compliance. And you can get these short-term benefits in terms of improvements in artery function, insulin sensitivity, mood, overall quality of life, et cetera, et cetera. But whether or not that actually translates into a longer lifespan is something we have yet to tease out.
Yeah, the whole field of kind of the philosophy of science of determining causality turns out to be harder than you think it is. We've just gone through this replication crisis in psychology and in medicine.
Yeah.
I mean, one reason you have 8,400 citations is because you got to go through that many, because everybody, I listen to all these different podcasts, and I've had these guests on my show. They cite this study or that study, and then you watch some other show and some other guys citing some other study that has the exact opposite. You should eat meat. Eating meat and butter and milk is great. No, actually, a plant-based diet. Be vegan. That show, and they all have studies.
Right.
So how do you know which studies are the right ones?
Yeah, I mean, the nutrition literature is a mess. Just because I, maybe, laying out the best available balance of evidence on a topic doesn't necessarily mean that evidence is particularly good. But it's the best we got. You got to eat something. So you kind of work with the best data you have. But, the global health and wellness industry is valued at like $4 trillion or something crazy. So no wonder there are so many baseless claims, so much pseudoscience. And so you say, okay, well, that's why we got to stick to the real science, right? The peer-reviewed scientific literature. But as you've been hearing, the peer-reviewed literature is broken. Says who? Says the longtime editors of the most prestigious medical journals on the planet, The Lancet, the New England Journal, right? Errors, fraud, falsification, fabrication, image manipulation, selective outcome reporting, publication bias, predatory publishing, p-hacking, harking, ghostwriting, right? The conflicts of interest among researchers, among editors, among entire journals. I mean, the list goes on. And as bad of a mess medical misinformation is, the nutrition literature is even worse. But, at least the peer-reviewed literature offers some bar to entry, unlike, people just spouting nonsense online. And so, it all comes down to, paraphrasing that Winston Churchill quote about democracy, peer-reviewed medical literature, worst form of evidence, except for all the others.
Yeah, right. Well, since you wrote a book about how to survive a pandemic, trust is pretty low now in medical institutions, the CDC, Anthony Fauci, and so on, because they told us not to wear masks, and they said we got to wear masks, and they said, well, maybe the masks didn't work. Well, the N95 masks work, but the other ones don't work, and so on, and vaccine mandates and mRNA vaccines versus some other kinds, and on and on and on. No one knows who to turn to, it seems. I still think, the CDC probably mostly gets it right, and maybe they made some errors. My complaint about Fauci and the others is, they hold these press conferences and they're under pressure to give us what we should do tomorrow.
Right.
Do we close the schools tomorrow or not? Tell us. Right. And maybe they just feel they can't say, well, at this moment, we don't really know. We think maybe an Bayesian probability of 60% versus 40%. And then, but the person's going to go, yeah, but what do I do tomorrow? Do we close the schools or not?
Right. No. I mean, those are the decisions have to be made in the context of indecision and imperfect data. I do not. I don't envy those who have to make those kind of decisions. But I was just doing a series of scripting some videos on vaccination, and it turns out, to my surprise and my pleasant surprise, the confidence in kind of typical childhood vaccination did not take the plummet after COVID that I thought it would. And so there still remains remarkable trust in science, in our institutions, even though certainly you go online, you wouldn't see that. But I mean, there certainly were gargantuan errors among some of our most prestigious institutions, not only the CDC, but the New England Journal, some of our best journals. And, it's just, and right, the difficulty of communicating uncertainty to scientific uncertainty is hard to communicate, I think, under kind of any kind of circumstances. But otherwise, you run into, wait a second, you said masks did this, and now it turns out they did this. You were lying. You had this underhanded, it was the cabal, it was the whatever, right? And ascribing kind of, sinister motives to just trying to kind of dumb it down for the public.
Yeah, no, I agree on that. I don't think Fauci and the CDC were testing the public to see how far we could get them to obey our orders, because in the long run, here's what our master plan is in the next 50 years to take control over the U.S. population. And Bill Gates is funding our vaccines in order to chip everybody so we know where they are. No. Okay. But what is your sense now, looking back here on November 13th, 2023, of how we did? What were the right things we did, and what were probably not the right things that we did?
I mean, the greatest success was this mRNA technology. I remember citing in the book, I forget, 11 years, 13 years to come up with a new, vaccine, historically. And the fact that at just such lightning speed, we came up with such this safe, efficacious vaccine. I mean, and, people are arguing, you said it was, 95%, and it turns out it's only like 70%, whatever. It's like, do you not know about vaccines? Like the typical flu vaccine has 30, if it's a 50% efficacious every year, I mean, that's like a great year. I mean, you don't understand. It's like putting a seatbelt on. It's not going to guarantee you're not going to die in a car crash, but why do we put our seatbelts on? Because we have good data to suggest it's going to lower our risk. So I don't know if we created too high of an expectation, but I mean, it just, anyone who who's in the field was just absolutely blown away by kind of the technical aspects of what we achieved, even though, in the culture, it just kind of seemed to all fall apart.
Yeah. What about masks? What did they really work?
Oh, well, see, I mean, then we get that kind of the kind of real world versus, kind of laboratory experiment kind of thing. So do mask mandates work? Mask mandates may not work, but why? Because people don't wear their masks. And so, but there's no controversy. I mean, you put people, I remember, I did my postgraduate medical training in a public health hospital, had one of the last locked TB wards in the country. And those N95s, all day, every day, we had to be wearing those because, in a very tightly controlled environment where you do fit testing, everything, these masks are amazing. But then, you have people wrapping, pantyhose around their face in the airport. And look, I had a mask and I still got COVID, so, it's a matter of, what are we talking? I mean, we know masks work, but in what context and advice to wear masks is not the same thing as, efficacy of actually wearing the mask.
And closing down beaches and mountain trails and playgrounds and isolating everybody indoors.
That did not age well. But of course, the biggest change, I think, we all remember back, was this. We really thought it was kind of, this droplet transmission where, that's where we get the whole 6 feet kind of thing. That's what we, are assuming from, we had, I think, good reason to assume that it was just these larger droplets that, fell out of the air. rather than this kind of measles-like airborne transmission. It was still super controversial, the fact that somebody in a hallway next to a sick patient actually got illness. How could that be? I mean, some of those early cases. And so it turned out to be much more transmissible than we ever knew. And so that really brings up the prospects of something like, these UVC or some of these technologies, improved ventilation, which is really, which does not require any, individuals to do anything right or wrong. It just kind of happens whether they like it or not. I think that's going to be an important lesson going forward. And of course, with the recognition that this was an incredibly wimpy pandemic, as pandemics go. And with the, there are pathogens out there with order of magnitude greater potential case fatality rates. And so one would hope that maybe this was the kind of the fire alarm, the kind of the test run that all got us, the dry run we needed to wake us up out of our complacency and reform the system before it's too late. However, the shitstorm it turned into be, one wonders whether even if people are kind of dropping dead on the streets, whether, we'd still be able to communicate effectively to do something about the next pandemic, which is inevitable, of course.
Yeah, right, exactly. But, there's a cost-benefit analysis to closing the economy, shutting down restaurants,
Sure.
closing schools, keeping little children home, or trying to teach them basics on Zoom when they're 5 years old. I mean,
Right.
Now we're 2 years behind. These kids are 2 years behind.
Yeah, but it's understandable. I mean, coronaviruses in general tend to, these kind of common cold coronaviruses tend to affect the young. We're kind of used to respiratory viruses affecting lung, like influenza. And so, I mean, it was just not out of the realm of possibility that, either children could get seriously ill or pass it along to grandparents or the vulnerable. Thankfully, it turns out that was not the case. But, early on, to think otherwise was not, not out of the question.
Okay, so anyway, back to the determining causality problem. If you have maybe a half a dozen to a dozen different variables that are going to affect the outcome you want to measure, which is how long you're going to live a relatively healthy life. How do you, when you read a paper, how do you think about it? Did they control for this? Did they control for that?
So we're often stuck with these kind of surrogate endpoints. So, the best we have are the interventional trials where we can actually ensure good compliance. But then, we're stuck with the amount of time due to, the costs involved. And so we're looking at things like what happens to artery function, what happens to cholesterol, what happens to, things that there are pretty good surrogates for that we know from, other bodies of data that correlate with longer lifespan. But if we want to look at hundreds of thousands of people over decades, then we're stuck with observational evidence, and we've gotten all sorts of fancy statistical techniques to adjust for confounders. But still very difficult to tease out. But, that should not prevent us from taking public health action that could potentially save millions of lives. For example, tobacco, right? There's never been a randomized controlled trial of tobacco. There was actually one of tobacco cessation, but of course it's not a randomized control of tobacco cessation. It's a randomized controlled trial of advice for smoking cessation, and it didn't work. So they actually, those randomized to the cessation group actually didn't live longer, but it's because the difference in cigarettes per day in the end wasn't enough to actually affect that difference. In fact, sometimes you actually see this kind of sick quitter effect where those who quit smoking actually live shorter lives than those who continue to smoke. And that's because, that's why we see the J curve with the alcohol consumption. Is that it's not that, abstinence led to disease, but that disease led to abstinence. Someone gets liver cirrhosis, they stop drinking, and then all of a sudden they drop dead, and you're like, that was a non-drinker. You're confusing a lifelong abstainer with someone who just stopped drinking last week, and you see the same thing with smoking. People get really sick, they stop smoking. And so, but these are all well understood aspects. The people I mean, it's very, these study designs are very easy targets, but it's not like, I mean, nutritional epidemiology in general, we have a half century of good science. People understand the downsides. We can mediate some of them. But in the end of the day, we are left with just making the choices based on the best available balance of evidence, like we did in the pandemic. Sure. I mean, what else can we do, right? Yeah. I mean, you have to eat something.
Take something like socioeconomic class as a factor. Yep. How do you know what it is? Is it the bad air, the crappy environment? The local restaurants are not serving as healthy food. They don't have as much money to buy better health care or exercise, or there's all. I just rattle off a few. There's probably 10 more in there. How do you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, how are you measuring socioeconomic status? Are you doing it by education level? Are you doing it by kind of income? Are you doing it by wealth? Are you doing it by where you're living? And so yeah, I mean, so there's tremendous confounding. So that anything associated with wealth, you really have to worry. So red wine consumption. Who's drinking red wine, right? Who's eating fish? Who's eating walnuts? You're always going down. And then on the other side, it's like, well, who's eating like the processed meat? Who's eating bologna sandwiches? Who's eating, although, sometimes you have something that kind of crosses over, like coffee consumption. Coffee consumption associated with cigarette consumption, coffee in general associated with kind of negative health. Yet those who drink coffee live longer, lower rates of cancer, et cetera, et cetera. So that you feel a little better about that data because these are things that are associated with kind of bad stuff. Similarly, dairy has this kind of health halo. People drink milk. They're told to drink milk. So those are the people that wear their seatbelts and do their smoke alarms intended. Yet we see all these negative effects associated with long-term dairy consumption. And so again, you have a little more feeling this is a little more robust. But when it's on one side of the ledger, it's, you really have to find ways to tease those out. And you do that by, looking at the entire hierarchy of evidence. What do we have in terms of interventional data for, these surrogate endpoints? What do we have, across the board with, all the different ways that we can tease this out, looking at the observational data?
Yeah, I've been hearing these things about food deserts. Poor people live in these neighborhoods where there isn't a Whole Foods right there,
right?
And the supermarket is serving mostly canned foods and things like that.
I love some canned foods. No, it's selling these salty snacks and and sugary beverages, right? These are swamps, right? It's not so much a desert. They got a lot of food, but it's all. And I mean, but there is this kind of targeting of these communities for. There's more tobacco advertising. There's more alcohol advertising. There's more, junk food advertising in these particular areas. And so then you run into this kind of, cause and effect conundrum as well.
Yeah. Okay, on the evolutionary stage again, what did our Paleolithic ancestors eat? How do we know? And since they died young for other reasons, fell off the cliff, got eaten by the predator or whatever, how do we know that we can get any lessons from, I don't know, ancestral people or people living today in hunter-gatherer type environments?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's certainly a kind of a seductive thought to like, well, how have we kind of evolved to, biologically to eat? And so I think it's natural to look back. Really, the question for me is how far are we looking back? So the kind of Paleolithic folks want to go back 2 million years, when we started using tools, say, okay, what did we eat back then? But now we really broke off with our last great ape ancestor about 20 million years ago in the Miocene era. And so since then, and so it depends kind of where you want to go back. If you go back to then for the first 90% of our evolution until that 2 million years ago, we were eating presumably what the rest of our great ape cousins ate, which is almost exclusively plant foods, until we learned how to learned how to make tools, and then later we were boiling sugarcane and gristing grains and on down the list. And so, but if you look at that first 18 million years or so of our kind of hominoid existence, We lost the ability to make vitamin C, for example, which is kind of rare in the animal kingdom, because all we were doing is eating, fruit and greens all day. I mean, our body just kind of junked the DNA because why make it? It's just kind of useless. We're getting it so much of it in our diet. These are kind of things that give us hints that are kind of the plant-based nature. We have these kind of fossilized feces, this kind of paleo poo, that we can look at and get a sense of, oh my God, we're eating 100 grams of fiber a day, 120 grams of fiber a day. I mean, that's just this massive amounts of this unprocessed plant foods, and gives us a sense, oh, okay, well then, maybe it makes sense where you look at areas like, rural Asia and rural Africa where they're eating diets more similar to this, where they did not get these kind of diseases of civilization. Of course, now they are, now that KFC has moved in. But, the first half of the last century, these were areas that didn't have obesity, didn't have blood pressures rising with age, didn't have heart disease, and so there's, there's a whole series of the hospitals set up throughout sub-Saharan Africa as part of a kind of a Christian ministry. And there was actually medical journals at the time, and they were documenting just tens of thousands of hospital visits, and didn't find things like rheumatoid arthritis and varicose veins and things that objective signs. And so the question is, wow, what about their lifestyles, their diet and lifestyles could help us? And so that's actually what the evidence that Pritikin used to suggest, let's put people on more of a plant-based diet to reverse their heart disease. But of course, back then we didn't have angiography. We couldn't actually prove anything. We just had kind of symptomatic relief. And then Ornish came along, Dr. Dean Ornish, with his lifetime heart trial, proving for the first time we could actually open up arteries without drugs, without surgery, just this kind of plant-based diet and lifestyle program. So this combination between, this observation, this really remarkable observational evidence, and then finally putting it to the test in randomized controlled trials and actually seeing, some of the plaque dissolve away, that gives us a sense of the direction towards which we should be eating.
Yeah, I saw that film, Forks Over Knives. I think that was Dr. Esselstyn, right? That was
Esselstyn. Yeah.
Esselstyn,
Clinic.
The plant-based, and actually showing, these X-rays of these arteries that are opened up, pre and post plant-based diet. I always like that the vegetarian poster of the gorilla. The big, massive silverback gorilla looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger. This badass motherfucker eats plants all day.
Right. Eat like an ox. Right, exactly.
But then, you read the pro-meat people and they go, no, that's, they didn't control for this or that. Look at the indigenous peoples of Alaska, they eat blubber and meat all day. That's all they have. And their arteries are clean and they're fine. Or, I don't know, you hear all these conflicting.
Right.
Yeah, so.
Right. But their arteries are not fine. We actually had the nice thing about dying in the permafrost is that we actually dig up bodies 50 years later and actually see what was going on in their arteries. And just like we were able to resurrect the 1918 virus because we actually find lungs that were sitting there for a century, and we see they were ravaged by heart disease, which is what you'd expect eating blubber all day.
Right. Okay. So let's get down to the details. Are you a vegetarian? Are you vegan? And what do you recommend to your patients?
I try not to be a hypocrite and eat what I recommend to my patients. But we really should try to eat primarily plant foods, though not necessarily exclusively plant foods. A plant-based diet, in my eyes, is really more about kind of maximizing the intake of the healthiest of healthy foods, right? As a physician, labels like vegetarian or vegan, they just tell me what you don't eat. I mean, do you actually eat vegetables? And it doesn't matter what you eat on your birthday, holidays, special occasions. But on a day-to-day basis, we really should try to center our plates around, natural foods from fields, not factories, kind of unprocessed plant foods. It's all about kind of centering one's diet around plants would be my recommendation.
Right. So you go to the supermarket, and what's the little rule? Stay on the outside, the perimeter of the supermarket.
Right.
That's where the fresh foods
produce
are.
Aisle. Skip the supplement aisle. Go right. Oh yeah. But that's in fact, much of produce is really a lost leader for supermarkets. It's getting you in the door so they can sell you where the stuff that they really make money off of, which is sugary drinks and salty snacks and things like that. But we can cut into their bottom line by just eating the good stuff.
Yeah. Okay, but again, with these confounders, you're confident that it's really the plant-based foods and not that people who eat a lot of plant-based foods just don't drink sugary drinks, they don't eat Twinkies, they don't smoke, they exercise more, and it's not the plants, it's the other things. How do you know?
Anytime you have observational data, that always right. So just because vegetarians have lower rates of cardiovascular disease, live longer, up to 3 times less rates of dementia, but they also probably less likely to smoke and exercise, and you can adjust for those factors, but you cannot adjust for everything, right? But you can adjust for the main confounding factors such that there'd have to be some remarkable hidden confounder that no one's ever heard of that could really push the bar over that much. But even among population studies, so for example, if you look at vegans in the UK, where you ask people why they're eating vegan, and predominantly it's from animal. They have this history of kind of an animal welfare protection kind of thing, and so they're doing it not for their health; they're doing it for the moral reasons.
Yeah.
And so they're eating like vegan donuts and French fries and that kind of thing. And their health is and so if you look at that data, they have very slight advantage over their kind of omnivorous brethren versus, for example, the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California, the big Adventist studies, where these people are doing it. Why? For their health. They have this kind of biblical body as a temple, and so that you're supposed to not smoke, you're supposed to do all these things. And they have, the longest life expectancy of any formerly studied population, but it's because there's this whole spectrum of things that they do. And so as far as I'm concerned, okay, let's look at that spectrum. What else are they doing? Oh, are they exercising? Let's exercise too. Oh, are they not smoking? Let's, not smoke too. And so, but yeah, you can definitely see. And in fact, there are these indexes. It started with a PrettyMed study with this pro-vegetarian index, and now Harvard has their own kind of plant-based index where basically you score people, you give people negative points for any kind of meat, eggs, dairy, any animal products, and positive points towards any kind of plant food, regardless. Like Coca-Cola is a plant food, you get a point. And then they see does a plant-based diet is it associated over time, over decades, with healthy outcomes. And the unhealthy plant-based diet, where you get points for all manner of potato chip and crap, you see no advantage, no survival advantage. Only people eating the healthy plant foods, substituting the animal products with healthy plant foods, do you see these kind of remarkable benefits, suggesting, well, maybe it's not the cutting down, maybe it's not the meat, eggs, and dairy at all, but it's the fact, it's not so much that is impairing one's health, but that the benefits of whole healthy plant foods like fruits and vegetables is so good that that's where most of the benefit of a healthy plant-based diet comes from, is the healthy foods you're eating rather than what you're cutting out.
Right. So eating, say, potato salad rather than French fries, that your potato salad hasn't been dipped in grease and have salt put on it.
Well, you've been dipped in mayonnaise grease and had salt to it.
True,
but you need a better example.
Okay,
baked potato. Baked potato.
Oh, baked potato, yes, okay. Without the sour cream, I guess.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But I like the sour cream. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, okay. So now on the meat question, difference between red meat, chicken, and fish, what are your recommendations? If somebody says, I want some meat, is it really better to have some salmon rather than a burger?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in nutrition, foods aren't so much good or bad for you as they are better or worse, because food is a zero-sum game, right? Every time we put something in our mouth, there's an opportunity cost, a lost opportunity to put something even healthier in our mouth, right? So, are eggs good for you? Compared to breakfast sausage, absolutely. Compared to oatmeal, not even close, right? Is fish good for you, right? Well, a tuna fish sandwich better than a bologna sandwich, but like hummus wrap would kind of beat out both of them. And so it's really, we despite the obesity epidemic, we really have remarkable ability to maintain our caloric intake day by day over the long term. And so there really is like 2,000 calories in the calorie bank every day or so. And it's like,
okay,
everything you eat is going to be a lost opportunity. So every cup of coffee is a lost opportunity to drink green tea, for example. So is coffee good for you? Well, compared to what, right? Compared to green tea? Well, you could argue no, but compared to, but there is benefit with a few minor caveats.
Right. But I like a tuna melt sandwich, but it's not the tuna that's the problem. It's all the mayo and the cheese and the bread.
Right. And I mean, if we go back before the Industrial Revolution, then the aquatic food chain would be much cleaner.
I see.
Unfortunately, kind of, the oceans are kind of humanity's sewer. All the mercury spewed from all the coal plants in China eventually kind of settles down. And so that's what you see. And so the highest levels of the kind of persistent organic pollutants, like the mercury and the DDT and PCBs, dioxins, etc., tends to be in the aquatic food chain. So we can eat smaller fish, shorter lived fish, lower down on the food chain fish. But tuna are massive animals and have been around a time and accumulate some of these kind of lipophilic or kind of fat soluble toxins over time.
And salmon?
So salmon are much smaller, right? So there's less. In wild caught better than farm, just because of what they're feeding the farm fish. But unfortunately, there's it's like extra virgin olive oil, because there's so much fraud in both fish labeling and extra virgin olive oil. You can tell someone to have extra virgin olive oil, but when you actually look at when you actually kind of put it to the test, it's actually a harder recommendation to follow.
Yeah, I saw that 60 Minutes piece years ago about fraud and virgin olive oil. Yeah. I never even heard of such a thing. Yeah. What a big business it is.
Oh my God. Everything across the board, the supplement industry, you name it. I mean, it's all just, if you can get away with it,
Right. Because you can take those pills that are the equivalent of like eating 2 salmon steaks a day or something.
Right.
But how do I know what's in there?
Exactly. Well, because of, DSHEA, 1994, that supplement act, thanks to the supplement industry, no longer they have to guarantee either safety, efficacy. It's just a wild, wild west out there, as opposed to something like, over-the-counter medications that actually have to prove that they're efficacious, actually have to prove that what's in the pill is what's actually, on the label. And none of that exists for the dietary supplement industry.
Okay, plant-based. Let's go down the line here. So carbs, some good, some bad. Oatmeal, can I eat oatmeal? What about granola?
So it's really all about source, right? So okay. I mean, there's it's like carbs are jelly beans and kidney beans, right? I mean, right? Same thing with with fat. Fat is lard or Crisco, hydrogenated oil, or something like walnuts or something. Same thing with protein. It could be protein powders, or it could be something really healthy. So it's really the source. I mean, the food industry would love you to worry about macronutrients, love you to just worry about your vitamins and minerals. Then they can sell you a breakfast cereal, which has fluorescent day glow marshmallows and has 13 vitamins and minerals in it, right? Because you're thinking, oh, it's this kind of nutritism. It's like, oh, I just need to hit these boxes, and then it doesn't matter if it's just sugary garbage. Whereas there's thousands of bioactive compounds in actual real food that you're kind of missing out, that may be not necessarily essential for life, but certainly essential for a healthy life, and they're missing off the nutrition labels there. So so they'd love you to think the food industry will sell us any flavor of junk food we want. They'll send us low-carb junk food, high-carb junk. They'll give us Snackwell cookies. They'll even, ironically, give us paleo junk food, right? You name it, they'll come up with it. And so they love that kind of thinking, where it really is, what are the sources of these macronutrients? And we can survive on a wide range. Low-fat diets, high-fat diets is where's that fat coming from? And ideally, we should have it from healthier sources, which tend to be whole, unprocessed plant foods.
Yeah. All right, so if I swing into Starbucks, should I get the egg sandwich or the classic oatmeal?
Oatmeal.
But they give you the sugar.
Out the brown sugar. Well, no, on the side. They give you a packet. You have to eat it? What do you mean?
Yes, I do, because it's in there. I have to eat it. It's in the bag.
Gun to your head? Right. No, give it to someone you don't like.
Okay. Right. So the sugar's a problem.
Sometimes at Starbucks you can actually get real blueberries. Have you actually seen that?
Yes, I have. Yes.
The first time that happened, I was like, oh my God, I'm in a new world. And then it didn't happen for another year or something.
Yeah.
Because I'm on the road so much. And so, it's hit and miss. But wouldn't that be nice if you could? Yeah.
Right. So what did you have for breakfast this morning?
Oh, I had oat groats, which are like steel cut oats before they're cut, basically. Mixed with it's pomegranate season now. Pomegranates. And now I can finally get cranberries. You can never get cranberries most of the year. And so cranberries, pomegranates, and with cocoa powder. And so it's like a kind of chocolate covered cherry sensation, but with pomegranates and cranberries. So very tart and sweet, delicious.
So no honey. You don't put honey on it.
No. But
What-
I put a chocolate balsamic, which has some sweetness. So that's really where the sweetness comes from.
But so honey is what's wrong with that?
Oh, I mean, honey's just sugar. I mean,
It's just
so
sugar,
I mean, you might
yeah.
as well just put. I mean, either. So if you like honey or agave, or I mean, all these sugars are basically just kind of equivalent and are used at such small doses. It really doesn't matter what are you putting it on, right? If you're putting sugar on your Fruit Loops, well, then that's but putting a little sugar,
Yeah.
people have this really magical thinking when it comes to diet. Like a little bit of, poison, pesticides, on down the list where, a little bit of, if this is bad, then even a little bit is bad. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy, obsessive thinking within the field of nutrition, and that just contributes to all the misinformation.
Now, do you put any milk on your oatmeal? Or
So I'm using
oat milk or
unsweetened soy. It's probably the healthiest milk out there.
unsweetened soy? Okay. Because why? Because dairy, the milk itself is not healthy, or the hormones that are in it?
Yeah, no, the milk itself. And so, the latest meta-analysis of dairy consumption and longevity is milk drinkers tend to live shorter lives. And that would be surprising given the health halo of milk drinkers. Who's drinking milk? The people who are following the recommendations to drink milk. So surprising that they would have lower. And we think it may actually be the galactose, which is a breakdown product of lactose. That, in a laboratory setting, that is how you accelerate aging in laboratory animals, is actually give them galactose. And you can get, you can make their bones fragile, you can give them cataracts and all these things. And so it's now fermented milk products actually ferment away the galactose. And so you don't see that inverse relationship with lifespan with yogurt, for example. So fermented dairy would be healthier, although yogurt these days has a lot of sugar in it, but you can actually get non-sugar added yogurt, and you would not expect to see the same kind of downsides.
Yeah, last year I accidentally, when I went to Starbucks, I ordered a venti whole milk latte, and they misheard me and thought I said oat milk.
Oh,
and I preferred the taste, and I think the oat milk is healthier than milk, right? Dairy milk.
There's not much nutrition in oat milk, so it's just you're not getting the whole milk, which is good. So you're not getting the saturated fat, a little bit of cholesterol, and and those milk sugars that we don't like, right? So, but really, oat milk there's really not much nutrition in it. So that's why the soy milk would be better, but either is better than dairy.
Okay. All right, let's continue on here through the day. So for lunch,
yeah.
If I like sandwiches, I mean I like salads, but I like to mix it up.
Yeah.
Is the bread a problem?
Oh, well, there's all sorts of breads out there, right? Yeah. So there's...
Okay, so let me say, my wife's from Germany. Man, they have great bread. Oh my God, the bread. And the loaf of bread is like 5 pounds.
Yeah. The rule of thumb is if bread hurts your foot, if it falls on your foot, that's the bread to eat. That's right. Whereas Wonder Bread, it's possible, you wouldn't even feel it. Right. Yeah. So, no. And in fact, some of those nice Germanic loaves, like the rye bread, actually has rye groats in it. Actually has whole rye groats in it. And yeah, you can see some remarkable effects of eating rye groats because they're so packed with these prebiotics, the fiber resistant starch, which are then converted by our good gut bugs into all sorts of beneficial postbiotic compounds like butyrate and propionate, such that you eat rye groats for supper like pumpernickel bread, and the next morning you feel just as full eating 100 calories less of breakfast 12 hours later, and this so-called second meal effect. That's because by that time your good gut bugs are eating that same sandwich and churning out these compounds which have that GLP-1 agonist activity that these new injectable weight loss drugs, dialing down your appetite, have anti-inflammatory effects, boost your immune system, all sorts of good things. And most these prebiotics are found concentrated in whole grains, which you get if you buy good bread, as well as the legumes like the beans, split peas, chickpeas, lentils.
And then what's in between my bread? So no cured meats, right?
Right.
What's the problem with cured meat?
So the problem is because the IARC, which is kind of the official body of the World Health Organization that determines what is and is not cancer causing, a few years ago raised processed meat to their category 1 carcinogen, meaning it's a known carcinogen, not just a probable carcinogen, but a known carcinogen contributing to colorectal cancer. And so 50 grams of a processed meat like bacon, ham, hot dogs, lunch meat is associated with an 18% increased risk of colorectal cancer, which, if you're not a smoker, is your number 1 cancer killer. So after lung cancer. And so that is approximately the elevated risk of lung cancer from living with a smoker, from secondhand smoke. Increases your risk of about 15% of getting smoked. So, I mean, if we wouldn't smoke around our kids all day, we should not send them to school with a bologna sandwich. So yeah, processed meat should be off the table. And, and there are legitimate, public health organizations out there like, the World Cancer Research Fund and the American Cancer Research, what are they? AC, I get them all mixed up. But there are that say, look, zero processed meat. Unfortunately, we don't have that same kind of, the powers that be. There's nothing on the CDC website that says don't eat processed meat. It's a category 1 carcinogen. In the same category as plutonium and tobacco and radon. And I mean, it doesn't cause the same amount of cancer, obviously, but it has the same level of certainty in terms of causality for colorectal cancer.
Okay, so lettuce, tomato, avocado.
Sounds good.
What else do I want to put in there?
So the food. So in the Global Burden of Disease Study, which is the largest study of risk factors for disease and disability in history, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the food most associated with extra life expectancy are legumes. So that's the beans, split peas, chickpeas, lentils. So if you could sow some hummus on there, some chickpeas would probably be the healthiest filling in terms of longevity. What's some other good? I don't know, some kind of, that would, so any kind of legume would be kind of the best. I guess you could like some kind of bean burger or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, so there's the Impossible Burger. I've had those. Yeah. I like those, but aren't there a lot of chemicals in those?
They have a lot of saturated fat because it's coconut oil, right? I mean, so most saturated fat is actually concentrated kind of meat and dairy, but there are these rare tropical oils, coconut oil, palm kernel oil, and palm oil, which are as saturated as the butterfat and lard and tallow and raise your cholesterol just as high, but they're solid at room temperature. And so that's why they have benefits in the food sphere, but you can get the same saturated fat intake eating an Impossible Burger as you do getting a regular burger. Now it has, yes, you could argue it has some fiber and doesn't have any cholesterol. There's certainly some benefits, and I see it as kind of a stepping stone food. I encourage people to, not everyone can go all, kale and lentils, the next day. So it has the same kind of flavors and textures and help people kind of move towards a healthier diet. I just don't want people to stall there, and like people to move away from the processed foods to healthier options.
Okay, if I opt for a salad instead of a sandwich, then it's the dressing that's the key here, right? Because some are better than others.
Yeah, so you're right. The healthiest thing would just be tons of vegetables, throw on some nuts and seeds on top, some avocados. A lot of these, the phytonutrients in greens that we want are these carotenoid nutrients, which are actually fat soluble. So if you put a fat-free dressing on without nuts, seeds, avocados, you actually aren't going to absorb those carotenoids. You give somebody a salad with fat-free dressing, and you hardly see any bump in carotenoids like beta-carotene in their bloodstream. It just passes right through you. So anytime we eat greens, we want to make sure we have some source of fat. The healthy source of fats are the nuts, seeds, seed butters, nut butters, avocado, these whole food sources of fat. So make sure they have some, walnuts on there or something. And you could do berries, you could do all sorts of wonderful things on that salad. And then, as long as it's not some fatty,
ranch.
Buttermilk ranch, kind of that kind of thing. Right. So ideally,
balsamic vinaigrette.
So balsamic vinegar would be fantastic. In fact, the acetic acid in vinegar has these AMPK boosting effects, which is this, enzyme involved in the aging process, actually beneficial for weight loss. Yeah. So big fan of adding vinegar to one's meals, and salad would be a perfect way to do it.
Yeah. Okay, snack in the afternoon. I'm guessing your cover here covers a lot of that. Nuts
There
and
we go.
berries.
Yeah, fresh fruit.
Yeah,
Fresh fruit,
just nibble on.
nuts.
But
Nuts probably the healthiest snack.
what about trail mix, something like that?
Oh yeah. So perfect. So although legumes on a serving per serving basis associated with the greatest longevity, on a gram for gram basis, nuts actually win out. So just a half to a single ounce a day of nuts, probably walnuts are the best. Is something I recommend people eat every day. And we do have interventional trials showing you can improve artery function within hours of consuming walnuts, things like that. And shown in like the Pretty Med study, large randomized controlled trial, decreased stroke risk, etc. So we do have good evidence on walnut consumption. Trail mix would be great.
How about cashews? I love cashews. Those big, huge cashews. You get a whole bucket of them from Costco. But they're salty. They taste better.
The concern is the salt. And so in that same global burden of disease study, they determined that diet is the number one killer of humanity. Here in the U.S., smoking only kills about 500,000 Americans every year. Diet kills more. And what is the worst thing about humanity's diet? And you think, oh, there's all sorts of horrible things. Number one is excess sodium consumption, right? Too much salt, because it contributes to death from so many different causes, from kidney failure to heart failure, high blood pressure, stroke, etc. And so cutting down on salt, if there's one thing we could do, and we have interventional trials where we actually take people, randomize people to sodium chloride or half and half sodium chloride, potassium chloride. So cut their salt in half without them even noticing it, some of these salt substitutes, and show 40% drop in all-cause mortality within a few years. Absolutely remarkable, just cutting down on salt without changing the taste or anything. So that is really number one thing we can do. So that's the worst thing about those nuts, but you can get unsalted nuts. And so, that would definitely be.
What about the fat? But that's good fat, right? Cashews are pretty fatty.
They are pretty fatty. So if you are trying to lose weight, they do have a high calorie density, meaning a lot of calories in a small space. And so particularly if you're like snacking on them while you're watching something and you end up going through a whole bag, you actually calculate those calories. You have ingested a huge amount of calories just because they're so concentrated. Typically plant foods, you'd get stretch receptors in your stomach bulging before you could actually overeat in calories. And typically only processed food, something like ice cream or something, where you could actually not even fill up your stomach and get 2,000 calories for the entire day. Whereas nuts and oil, oil 120 calories per tablespoon. So drizzling some oil, you get a lot of calories for not a lot of nutrition. And so that would be my only concern. And actually, if you get over a cup of nuts, so like a cup of cashews, you could actually run into problems with oxalate consumption. So there are cases in the literature of people literally eating a cup of cashews a day and getting kidney stones, these oxalate nephropathy. So I would moderate one's intake of nuts.
Okay. All right. Dinner. What'd you have for dinner last night? What are you having tonight?
Okay. What did I have for dinner last night? I had leftovers. I had these baked falafel. These air fried falafel, and with the tahini sauce and salad. It was delicious. And then today, I don't know what I'm going to have yet, but I do have a box of purple sweet potatoes that I just got. That I'm looking forward to doing something with. You bake them for an hour, 375. They get all caramelized, delicious, very filling, bright purple color. The kids love them. Yeah, and formed 69% of the caloric intake of the Okinawan Japanese when they were second longest living population at the time.
Right, I thought it was the fish though on the Okinawa diet. No.
Oh no, less than 1% of the calories for fish. Less than 1%. So they were not fish eaters. So they were 96% plants, with less than 1% in eggs, less than 1% dairy, less than 1% fish.
I see. Okay.
They were eating sweet potato based diets. No wonder they lived so long until the Kentucky Fried Chickenization and now Okinawa has actually some of the worst public health statistics in Japan, and so there's been a big push to get the Okinawans to eat the Okinawa diet too.
Yeah, and again, you talk about that in the blue zone people.
Right.
And again, determining causality, how do you know which factors matter in the blue
Right.
zones? Because you
Right.
also
Right.
mentioned they have more friends, they walk a lot,
Right.
they have a tight social net. They do a lot of lifestyle things that are
Sure.
in addition to the diet.
Yeah, so right. So you're looking for the Venn diagram. And so there's a number of lifestyle factors. So a diet is thought to to be the major factor, account for about half of the longevity benefits. And so so if you go to like there's a Blue Zones organization that did 150 dietary surveys in these blue zones, and they find out that they're eating, 95% ish plant-based, cutting down on processed foods, drinking, water, tea, eating nuts, cutting down on, a lot of this sugary, salty garbage. Although really only one blue zone exists to this day, and that's the Adventists in Loma Linda. And again, because they have this kind of religious persuasion that kind of keeps them in line in the face of being bombarded by, a society that wants them to eat, junk food, fast food.
Only one left. Wow.
One left.
Okay. I thought there was a group in Sardinia or something like that.
Yeah, so there used to be, and then Korea, and then there's one in South America and one in Okinawa, but they've all been kind of westernized their diets.
Yeah.
And a lot of these blue zones were actually really isolated. So they were islands or a peninsula very far away. And so the only reason they weren't eating crap is because they had no access to crap. And so, they would eat all the sugar that they would, but they didn't have sugar. They didn't have tobacco. They didn't have access. And so then once they did, the public health statistics toppled. And so, yeah. So, I mean, that really, really speaks to, what can we do kind of societally in terms of choice architecture, making default choices, healthier choices, these kind of things, just because, in the face of such temptation, it's, we have the public health statistics to it really shouldn't just be for the few obsessives, that are going to kind of stick to the plan and buck the societal trends. But there's some policy decisions we can make, like in the tremendous public health victory of tobacco cessation, where most of Americans used to smoke. In fact, per capita cigarette consumption was thousands of cigarettes, half pack a day, average man, woman. Just unbelievable. Now to under 15% of smokers, and the lung cancer rates plummeted along, a decade after. It's just a beautiful. And so what happened there? There was taxation. There was, changes in workplace, getting vending machines out. And so, you can imagine similar kind of levers for diet, but powerful. There was kind of one powerful industry, the tobacco industry, which really fought tooth and nail against these changes. And now kind of the food industry is even more profitable, so many different sectors, and really has kind of stranglehold here in the Beltway on food policy, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, alcohol with my dinner. I like a glass of wine or two, maybe one before, one during, maybe one after, unless I switch over to the Ben and Jerry's, which is probably not a good idea, I know. But alcohol, beer and wine versus spirits, what are your recommendations?
Yeah, so, everyone agrees that, heavy drinking during pregnancy, and binge drinking is bad for you. But there's been this controversy about this moderate drinking. In that those who tend to live the longest are not the abstainers who drink zero alcohol, but those who imbibe a few drinks a week. Unfortunately, as I was mentioning before, this appears to be an artifact of the so-called sick quitter effect, arising from the systemic misclassification of former drinkers as if they were lifelong abstainers.
I see.
So according to the Global Burden of Disease Study, the World Health Organization, the World Heart Federation, the safest level of drinking is none, with no apparent benefit from light to moderate drinking. And it's because alcohol is a carcinogen, or acetaldehyde, the breakdown product of alcohol, is a carcinogen, and which tends to be the second leading cause of death in most kind of westernized countries.
You don't drink any beer or wine?
Don't drink any beer and wine. I do. I cook with wine, but the alcohol cooks out.
And spirits are worse? Whiskey, bourbon,
Oh,
tequila?
I think, only because, they're more concentrated in alcohol, but of course people drink less of it. So it's really about the kind of units of alcohol.
Mm.
Although, one could argue that, at least with wine, you're getting some of the kind of grape phytonutrients, particularly with red wine from the skins of the grapes, as opposed to something where, where you're really, just distilling off the alcohol and not left with any of the kind of goodies in the original. But grapes, barley, and potatoes really are best eaten in their non-distilled form, and Johnny Walker is no substitute for actual walking.
That's a funny line. Okay. All right. Now, the Ben and Jerry's, my favorite one, is one that has all the nuts in it. That's got to be good, right?
The nuts are good. Well, Ben and Jerry's has plant-based ice creams now. They have
right.
I forget if it's almond milk based or oat milk based or whatever.
Right.
Now, it's still packed with sugar, blah, blah, blah. But, it would be better. It would be lower in saturated fat, less cholesterol raising. Yeah. So try, there's I think it says plant-based on it, which is kind of like a, little health halo trying to sell anything.
Well, in the Whole Foods down here, they have these vegan cookies. But I always wonder, did they just make up for the lack of whatever's in regular cookies with stuff that's probably not all that healthy?
Oh, well, yeah. So they're probably using tropical oils, which have the same saturated fat. So the only benefit would, if they're cutting out eggs, be cutting out some of the dietary cholesterol. But yeah, cookies are cookies.
Yeah.
Right. And so look, but these are, right. Doesn't matter what you eat on your birthday, holidays, special occasions, right? These should be like special occasion foods. And it's all about controlling one's food environment. If you have, cookies in your house and you have apples in your house, the first couple of days you can white knuckle it and eat those apples, but you're going to have a bad day. And if the cookies are there, eventually you're going to eat some cookies. So my recommendation is you just don't have bad food in the house, such that you get hungry enough, you're going to eat that apple, because it's kind of like the best thing you got. Controlling one's food environment, which now that many people work from home may be getting easier and easier. And so it's like, well, let's remove the kind of temptation. You're not walking past the donut store every day. Those are the kind of things that I think can help people, stick with healthier foods.
Well, last question on the wine thing. What about that resveratrol or whatever it was?
Resveratrol.
Yeah,
right. Red wine molecule.
Did that ever get replicated or?
Oh, yeah. Well, so the most concerning is there was these two randomized controlled trials that found that a tripling of brain shrinkage in those randomized to resveratrol versus placebo. So a 3% drop in brain volume versus 1%. Ironically, the researchers tried to spin the resveratrol company funded researchers tried to spin that as, there's less inflammation in the brain. So that's why the brain shrunk. But
That's pretty funny.
That explanation was not taken well by the commentators. Yeah.
That's funny. Right. And it was equivalent. You'd have to drink like 3 bottles of red wine a day or something.
Right. There's no way you could get kind of supplement levels resveratrol in. Right.
Okay. Intermittent fasting.
Yeah. So that was actually the biggest chapter of the weight loss book. There's some really kind of fascinating data in terms of longevity, but where the kind of bottom line is early time restricted feeding is probably the most beneficial. Everything we can kind of learn due to our chronobiology, our circadian rhythms, the more we can push calories towards the beginning of the day, the better. If we're going to skip any meal, we skip supper, not breakfast. In fact, one of the reasons Adventists may be living longer is because they make breakfast or lunch the kind of main meal of the day, and it's better so like the exact same food eaten in the morning is more fattening, actually leaves you with more body fat than the exact same food, exact same calories eaten at night. Higher blood sugars, higher triglycerides. Basically, if you're going to eat junk food, eat in the morning, your body's better able to deal with that cookie and the Ben & Jerry's for breakfast than is any other time of the day.
Yeah, but practically speaking, you eat dinner, let's say, at 6 or 7 o'clock. And then you can make it through the night, of course, and then maybe you work out in the morning, and then you last to maybe 11 or 12 before you eat again. That's that intermittent, maybe 12 hours.
Right. So that's more like kind of late time restricted feeding. So time restricted feeding typically defined 12 hours or less daily feeding window. But the question is, where is that window going to be? And if it's later, so you're skipping breakfast and eating later, then you can actually have negative metabolic effects. The ideal would be early time restricted feeding, such that you're eating, you're not eating after 7 p.m., not eating after it's dark. We do have good interventional data showing, at least for intermittent, for these kind of intermediate endpoints, beneficial metabolic effects of doing that.
Right. Okay, vitamins and supplements. Assuming I don't have some deficiency due to genes or whatever, what do I need?
Yeah, well, those who get inadequate sunshine exposure may indeed need to get vitamin D, the sunshine vitamin. Even if you get a lot of sun during the winter months at high latitudes, like if you're up in London, no matter how much you kind of sunbathe naked next to the River Thames, you're not gonna make enough vitamin D. The sun's rays are just such an angle, and so during the winter months, your levels do drop to levels of which may not be optimal for health, and so yeah, inadequate sun exposure, vitamin D. Women thinking about getting pregnant need to get folic acid. If you're an alcoholic, there's a whole list of supplements for them. But for typical people, at age 50, according to the Institute of Medicine, now the Academy of Medicine, age 50, everyone should be taking a vitamin B12 supplement or eating vitamin B12 fortified foods starting at age 50, something that
like what?
Not a lot of people know about. So our body's ability to extract vitamin B12 from foods declines with age, and because the effects of B12 deficiency can be so serious in terms of neurological and anemia and on down the list. The recommendation is everyone age 50 should be taking a vitamin B12 supplement or eating vitamin B12 fortified foods.
Like what?
Vitamin B12 fortified foods. So there's breakfast cereals have B12 added to them. There's a Celestial Seasonings tea that has B12 added to it. Something called nutritional yeast has a lot of B vitamins added to it. You kind of look at the package. I mean, you can look for vitamin B12, and it's just you can get in a multivitamin.
Okay, yeah, all right, yeah, but again, there's these studies. There's all these supplements and vitamins, and again, researching my book on this, people like Ray Kurzweil take 250 supplements and vitamins a day.
Insane.
I did this in the 80s. I did experimenting with things when I was a bike racer, and my pee was just this like glowing green orange. It's like, well,
it's the riboflavin.
There goes $20 out out of the ground.
Yeah. And those are the confounders, right? Those who take multivitamins live longer than those who don't, but supplement users wealthier, highly educated, more physically active, healthier diet, less likely to be a smoker, heavy drinker, obese, right? And when you peel away those factors, the apparent benefits of multivitamin use disappear. And to answer this question once and for all, Harvard researchers randomized 15,000 people in one of the biggest randomized controlled trials ever done to the common daily multivitamin Centrum Silver for more than a decade and found zero benefit for total mortality. And we have 8 other randomized controlled trials, similarly with over 50,000 men and women for decades, and all show the same thing: no overall benefit to mortality. But at least multivitamins appear to be safe. That was actually seen as good news because the results from the Iowa Women's Health Study found multivitamin use associated with greater mortality. So the fact that it wasn't associated with mortality was actually taken as a good thing. But it's not something that you would expect to live longer with. And in fact, you have this. There's kind of a quirk of human psychology such that you take a supplement, you think you're doing yourself favors, then you have this kind of compensatory, I can have an extra cookie, or I can have I don't have to, because I just took an antioxidant pill and now I'm, somehow protected. And so you can do these, the studies where you hidden camera somebody at a buffet after taking a supplement, which is actually a placebo, and they, take more dessert than they would otherwise. Of course, can you replicate half of these studies?
Yeah.
God knows, but yeah.
Yeah, I used to see Ray Kurzweil periodically at TED-like conferences. And,
nice.
He's like 10 years older than me, and every time I see him, it's like, dude, you look like you're 10 years older than me. I mean, it's like, whatever you're doing, I don't think it's really working.
Oh, poor guy.
I mean, I understand the logic. He gets his blood tested and cleaned and all that stuff. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, there's just only so much you could do. Okay, I want to hit some other important topics here. Sunscreen.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, why is it my dermatologist looks between my toes? My toes are never exposed to the sun. What has this got to do? And if that's the case, then why bother with the sunscreen? If I
Yeah,
can
no,
get,
they're looking for melanoma. No, absolutely. No, hey God, they look all I mean, yeah,
I know.
they should look in all nether regions.
Yes,
And if your dermatologist is not bending you over, you need a better dermatologist. Seriously. There's this kind of right. Okay. So there's different types of skin cancer, some of which more associated with UV ray exposure than others, but we do have very good data suggesting particularly exposure in youth to these like tanning beds, which have a UV spectrum that just seems developed to make cancer, with significant increased rates of melanoma, which is our most serious kind of skin cancer. And we actually have randomized controlled trials proving sunscreen actually does prevent cancer. And we do this not by randomizing people to placebo sunscreen, which is considered to be unethical, but we basically randomize people to advice to use sunscreen whenever you think is necessary versus advice to seriously wear sunscreen, to use the right amount of sunscreen and every single day, blah, blah, blah. And when you do that and you can randomize people out for years, get enough compliance, you actually see significant reduction in skin aging, signs of facial aging, as well as significant drop in both precancerous skin lesions and actual skin cancer. And so it's been proven to prevent skin cancer. And
SPF 30, 50, 100, what do I need?
Yeah, interesting. Right. So technically, the recommendation is 15 for skin aging and 30 for cancer. That's actually overkill, but it's because people don't apply enough sunscreen.
I have the 50.
Right. No. In fact, when they randomize people to apply 50 versus 100, you actually see benefit in terms of reducing the skin redness to sun exposure to 100 versus 50, whereas theoretically they completely block all, but it's because people don't apply it correctly. There's a so-called teaspoon rule. You're supposed to apply 1 teaspoon to each arm, 1 teaspoon to the front of the torso, but 1 teaspoon to the back.
I just use the spray because the spray distributes it more evenly and faster.
Well, there's a little. I would hold your breath.
Oh no. Yeah, I do. I know because it stinks. I don't want it in my lungs.
Yeah, we're concerned a little bit about the aerosol. Unfortunately, I think most of the sprays are still the chemical sunscreens. The FDA, and this, all of a sudden removed the generally recognized as safe for all the chemical sunscreens just because, little did we know that more of these sunscreen chemicals are actually absorbed into our bloodstream than we used to think. And so we just need to do safety testing, which we didn't have to do before. And so they could all be completely safe. We just don't know. And so right now, according to the FDA, there's really only 2 that are considered safe, which are the mineral sunscreens, the titanium dioxide, zinc oxide. And I don't know if those are available in the spray forms. They do kind of have that white residue, so particularly people with darker skin don't want to use it, but that's really the kind of the best sunscreen to use until we have better safety data.
Okay. Sunglasses. I'm outdoors every day, a couple hours. I have expensive Oakley sunglasses with polarized lenses. Is that really going to help prevent cataracts and stuff as I get older?
Oh, yeah, no. Both cataracts and macular degeneration, 2 of the leading causes of blindness, of adult onset blindness. And in fact, cataracts may be a way, the yellowing of the cataracts may be a way of protecting your retinas because we're blocking those high energy blue rays that are going to affect our very, very sensitive tissues in the back of our eyeball. And so actually when you remove in cataracts, cataract surgery is a wonderful, easy, quick surgery. When you move cataracts, actually you can get a worsening in retinal damage if you're not wearing eye protection and you're exposing the retinas to the UV. You realize it's like a magnifying glass. That's what the lens is. It magnifies those rays right into the back of the eye. And so, we really do want to be protecting. And so, look, you can wear a hat. You could, but ideally wrap around sunglasses.
I read that peoples that live in the Himalayas have more eye problems because they're higher altitude, so less atmosphere for the sun to come through.
I wonder if there's reflection off the sun too. I'm not sure. Off the snow,
off the ice. Yeah, that could be
that's kind of snow blindness, phenomenon.
Yeah. All right, cholesterol and statins. Do I need to take a statin? I've been on them. I've been off of them. I don't know because my cholesterol is not super high. it's just in that kind of borderlands where some doctors go, oh, you should just be on statins. We give them to everybody.
Put it in the water supply.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. No. Well, there's three kind of validated risk scoring systems. There's the Reynolds risk score. The AHA has one where you can calculate your 10-year cardiovascular disease risk, and that is the decision tree on which statins are recommended or not. And so below a certain percentage, they recommend just people to stick with a lifestyle. Above a certain percentage, they tell people everyone's got to be on statins. And then there is that gray area in the middle where it can kind of go either way. And so we kind of say, well, let's start with lifestyle and see what happens. But for people who are unable or unwilling to change their lifestyle and have sufficiently high LDL, then absolutely should be on a statin dose high enough to drop their LDL cholesterol, their so-called bad cholesterol, under 70 if we're looking at primary prevention, meaning you've never been diagnosed with heart disease, no known heart disease, 70, and then secondary prevention, really looking at under 50, under 30, basically as low as we can push it. So if you've had, for example, a coronary calcium scan, know that you have atherosclerosis, then it really is about pushing the LDL down as low as possible. You can get an extraordinarily low LDL cholesterol with statin lifestyle interventions, but for people who are unable to reach that, then and even if the statins don't do it, we've got more drugs we can add to it. But yeah, I mean, we probably evolved to for an LDL of about 30, and now it's about 110 on average. No wonder the number one killer of humanity, at least in high-income countries, is heart disease.
Wow. Okay. Right. But wasn't there something about that number that need to be treated in order to see a statistical difference in
Oh my God. Yeah. No. So, and this is why, so both patients and physicians alike overestimate the benefits of these so-called lifestyle drugs, like blood pressure lowering drugs, osteoporosis drugs, cholesterol lowering statin drugs. The absolute risk reduction for something like a statin drug for secondary prevention, someone that's really high risk, they've already had a heart attack, trying to prevent their second heart attack, absolute risk reduction, 2%. So we're talking like 6% down to 4% over 6 years. Just had a heart attack, trying to prevent another one. Over the next 5 or 6 years, your risk goes down from 6% down to 4% if you take statins versus not taking statins or taking a placebo. And so now that is, obviously that's sold to the public because that's a 30% drop because relative risk reduction of 30%. Which is true, but that's, you have to treat 50 people, right? So 98 out of 100 people are not benefiting from that drug. And so now, and when you tell people that, people don't take them, right? When you actually inform people of the actual risk versus benefit, people don't take them. Now, unfortunately, that could literally mean, if everybody knew the truth, that could mean millions of deaths on a population scale. So on an individual level, it may not make sense, but on a population scale, it makes tremendous sense. This is kind of this prevention paradox that fully informing our patients might get them to not do what we want them to do, which we know on a population scale will save lives. But on an individual basis, statins do increase risk of diabetes.
I'm one of those because I read that and thought, well, I have no history of heart disease. I work out a couple hours a day. My diet's reasonably good. And I had the cardio scan and it was low. I think it was 96 or something.
Okay.
And I thought, well, I'm not in that number that's going to benefit. It's 0.01% or something.
And blood pressure's good. Cholesterol's not too high. Perfect. Yeah. So you can absolutely make a rational, but on a population scale, these are remarkably safe drugs as drugs go, right? And could save lots of lives. But yeah, we're really talking about on a population scale.
Yeah, that reminds me of those statistics where you hear reported on the news, like there was 100% increase in this particular disease. You're like, oh my God. And then you realize it's like, it went from 1 per 100,000 to 2 per 100,000. Like,
that's right.
Oh, so this doesn't really affect me. No.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. Happens every day.
It's like that Ellen DeGeneres bit about, watching the news and all the bad reports, like, stay tuned because there's something in your diet that could kill you. And she's like, is it the peas? Yeah. Okay, what was I going to ask about? Oh, yeah. So, again, guys, my age. I got the vaccine for shingles. Is that a good thing?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm starting at age 50 shingles. And at your age, you should also be getting pneummonia vaccination. 65, starting
Pneumonia.
at 65.
Why? You mean because if how am I going to get pneumonia?
Pneumococcal pneumonia is the number one cause of community acquired, meaning not hospital acquired, pneumonia, and a leading cause of death in the United States.
Oh,
And you
just walking
can,
around.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Oh no.
And you can significantly reduce your risk. And particularly significantly reduce your risk of invasive pneumococcal disease, where you not just get pneumonia, but then it gets into your bloodstream, gets into your brain, and can be life-threatening. And so it decreases your risk of not only getting pneumonia, but it dramatically decreases your risk of dying from pneumonia.
Yeah.
So definitely would be worth the vaccination.
Yeah. Okay, brain, since you mentioned brain. Yeah, that section in your book about Alzheimer's, and oh my gosh, this is really brutal. What do we know that could be done, if anything, at this point for dementia? I have a friend who's got Lewy body disease, and she's just in a home, and I mean this is like one of the smartest people I've ever met, and now she's just gone. It's like,
oh my
terrible.
God, that is a tragedy. That is a tragedy. Yeah, So dementia, the most feared disease of old age, no surprise. The good news is that modifiable lifestyle factors can outweigh the genetic component of Alzheimer's disease, which is determined by this ApoE gene, which is the primary cholesterol carrier in the brain. But by lowering one's cholesterol low enough, we can kind of trump the role that even a homozygous ApoE4 individual would otherwise have. There's this so-called Nigerian paradox I talk about in the book, where they have among the highest rates of the Alzheimer's gene, but actually some of the lowest rates of Alzheimer's disease, and that's because they just tend to have low cholesterol levels. So having a cholesterol over 225 in middle age may increase the odds.
What's the causal vector there from cholesterol to the plaques and tangles to the death of neurons?
So atherosclerosis is related to the atherosclerotic plaque buildup in the brain in the actual cerebral artery. So the same dietary changes that can help with cardiovascular health, such as reducing cholesterol, reducing blood pressure, can help with cognitive health. What's good for the heart is good for the brain. Normalizing blood pressure in hypertensive individuals can improve cognition in both the people with normal cognition, those with mild cognitive impairment, and those with dementia. Aerobic exercise can improve brain function for the same reason. Now,
these are preventative measures.
These
right?
are all preventative.
Once you're diagnosed.
Although the only thing that's been shown, one of the only things that's been shown to actually slow the progression of Alzheimer's, something that the drugs have, the traditional drugs like diazepam and memantine have not been able to show to do, is controlling cardiovascular risk factors. So you take Alzheimer's patients and you randomize them to blood pressure lowering reduction and cholesterol lowering reduction. You actually decrease the rate at which cognitive decline. Now, you can argue that, do we want to decrease the rate of after a certain point? Is slowing the rate of disease something that we're interested in? These are, those are kind of other issues. But the most important thing is that though Alzheimer's is incurable, it is preventable. There's things we can do to reduce our risk of dementia, including avoiding head injuries and kind of the long list of factors I go through in the book.
Yeah, unbelievable. How big a factor that's becoming for us baby boomers.
It is just frightening. Frightening is all, yeah.
What about brain supplements in general? Again, a lot of these podcasters I won't mention who, is always promoting these, this will improve your memory. This will make you sharper and faster. Yeah.
No. In fact, just today, on the day that we're recording this, the video of the day on nutritionfacts.org is about this Prevagen, which is the most commonly marketed brain supplement that has this protein from a luminescent jellyfish. Company claims it's going to clinically improve your memory, but when actually put to the test, actually failed to show any significant effects for anything. And the Center for Science and Public Interest had an article saying, how can this memory supplement flunk its one trial and still be marketed as effective? And indeed, in 2020, was settled with the FTC over charges of false advertising, deceptive business practices. Basically, it's just a fascinating story. But
by the way, what is the law on that? If it's labeled as a food product rather than a medical product, it has lower standards of proof.
No. Well, but they're making claims. That's the problem. So they're making claims. So they say that it improves short-term memory, long-term memory, and delayed recall over 90 days. They funded a study that showed it did absolutely none of those. And so that was so if they just would have shut their mouth and said, had a brain on the cover, I don't know exactly how but look, you can make any disease claims you want, but you have to back them up with actual science. And they were unable to do that. But I mean, so brings in $20 million a year and has never been shown to be effective. That's just such a perfect representation of kind of where we are with kind of the anti-aging field, right? About a third of older Americans, according to the AARP, are taking some kind of brain supplement, but they're being preyed upon. This vulnerable population being preyed upon, but obviously we're worried about declining brain function, and what a perfect storm for them to prey upon those fears. But though most people think that supplements have to at least be tested and shown to be safe, it's not true. And so there's been a couple studies on so-called cognitive performance supplements or brain supplements. One was on 24 supplements. This is just top of mind because it was up this morning. That most found that an ingredient on the label that was missing from the supplement, so it didn't actually have what's in it, and 38%, even more concerning, had something in it that wasn't listed on the label, like prohibited drugs. Another study of a dozen so-called brain supplements found that 8 out of 12 misbranded, meaning missing ingredient on the label, and 10 out of 12 had other ingredients that weren't supposed to be there, including like caffeine in one that had in all caps decaffeinated, like no caffeine on the label, like what specifically, right? And it's even worse for so-called sexual performance supplements and weight loss supplements, in terms of containing prohibited drugs. And I mean, it's just, it's a wild, wild west out there. And
remember that what was that vitamin C tablets developed by a 5th grade teacher a few years ago?
Oh no, airborne. The homeopathic supplements. In fact, the study of homeopathy as a so-called null field shows how bad the peer-reviewed science is broken, where 80% of homeopathy studies and in recent meta-analysis show these large treatment effects. So either the laws of physics and chemistry are wrong, or more likely, the researchers are able to game the system to selectively report or selectively publish or make or falsify their results such that they can publish these results. And so we can use these null fields to get a sense of just how skewed the literature can be when there's money in the mix. Even without money in the mix, these ideological, I think homeopathy works, whether or not I'm selling homeopathy, and therefore can push things in one direction or another.
Everybody's looking for just that one thing I got to do. Yeah, and it's never going to be one thing.
Magic bullet. I know, particularly with something like aging, something that's just so, so biologically complicated. I mean, although, we used to think that about aging, then all of a sudden, a single gene would come along, like the IGF-1 gene, where all of a sudden one single gene mutation could add 50% lifespan to some little worm or something. And that got us really excited. The fact that, little tweaks could have such huge effects. Unfortunately, they have yet to really translate out, into people and sometimes not even into rodents.
Is it too soon to draw any conclusions about Ozempic and the new magic weight loss drug?
Oh, that's interesting. So they just published this week. They finally published that study where they actually looked and claimed that they have lower cardiovascular disease.
Right.
And so, so that's what we've really been waiting for, because you just never, ever trust anything Big Pharma says in a press release. I mean, we've learned our lesson over many years. So it was a combined endpoint, which is usually, you always want to see exactly what actually helped in the end. So it was a combined of all-cause mortality or a cardiovascular event, non-fatal stroke, non-fatal heart attack. And it actually showed, I believe over 40 months or so, significant decrease in all-cause mortality. So you live significantly longer taking these drug versus taking placebo. No surprise, given that you had this dramatic weight loss. Now, of course, history is littered with miracle weight loss medications that then were withdrawn from the market for causing all sorts of horrible things, fen-phen, amphetamines, on down the list. But I think that we're really facing, but this new class of drugs really does seem to be able to stand up for and provide a proof of significant benefit where we care about the most, these hard endpoints. And so I see these drugs like bariatric surgery, where option of last resort, but if you're unwilling or unable to change your weight, then obesity is such a contractor of both lifespan and health span that even those randomized to bariatric surgery, which is a risky surgery for people that size, live significantly longer than those that didn't. And it's because the ravages of obesity are so serious, and we're seeing that now with these new class of drugs.
Right. All right, sleep, 8 hours?
7 to 8 hours. Yeah, 7 to 8 hours is the recommendation. Although, the sleep literature is, it's talking about confounders, right? Very difficult. Who sleeps? Sure, people with jobs. And there's all sorts of things that go into, people who sleep long are depressed or they're, so 7 to 8 hours is probably the best. But we really don't have solid evidence that has anything to do with longevity. In fact, if anything, longer sleeping is associated with shorter lifespan. But again, that's just a panoply of confounders.
Yeah. Yeah, Walker had that book, sorry, I forget his first name, Why We Sleep, that was so popular. But then he got criticized. He cut off the graph from that showed it was like,
the injury.
Like 5 hours versus 8 hours, and he cut off the 5 hour part that you could function just fine.
Yeah. That's inexcusable.
Again, everybody's looking for that. Just tell me exactly how much sleep I got to get, and then that'll solve all these problems. Well, nothing is ever.
Right now, but similar to exercise, we do have evidence that, for example, adequate sleep can significantly boost our immune function. So, for example, you can randomize people to get the common cold virus literally dripped in their nose, and after randomizing them to an all-nighter, and of course, there's 100% infection in both groups. They literally had the virus dripped in there, but 5 times more. In the sleep deprived group actually came down with symptoms, actually came down with the cold. And most people in the well-rested group were able to fight it off and they didn't even notice. And so it's that kind of, now, of course, you can't do those kind of experiments with more serious pathogens such as influenza or things that we really care about. But that does suggest that, adequate sleep, particularly during flu season, would be beneficial.
Yeah. And then sleep cycles, 90 minutes is a natural cycle for most people. Is that still
these are all, big averages, but yeah. But you put people on a sleep study and you can get those kind of.
In other words, if you're going to have a short night, try to make it a factor of a 90 minutes, like 3 hours, 4.5 hours, something like that.
And try not to, sleep deprivation contributes to car accidents.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of kind of other,
it's a one-off, not, like every night.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I tested this back in 1982 when we did the first race across America, nonstop transcontinental bike race. You don't have to sleep. You don't have to sleep at all, right? So I read about this kid that went 11 days without sleep at a UCLA
Jesus.
lab in the 70s, and playing not video games, pinball games and stuff like that.
Oh, Jesus.
Anyway, but then I read about the 90-minute sleep cycle. So I skipped the first night of sleep and made it all the way to Flagstaff from Santa Monica, and then took a
Amazing.
90-minute sleep break, and then 3 hours every night after that.
Oh.
And I'd time it to wake up when the sun was coming up to kind of trick my body.
Oh, right.
Anyway, then a couple of weeks ago, I kind of did this again by accident, that on a flight from Montgomery, Alabama to Dallas-Fort Worth to Santa Barbara, the flight at Dallas-Fort Worth got delayed. Rain delay. 7 hours later, at 2 a.m, we're on the tarmac, and they're going, the radar on the plane is broken, and we don't have any other equipment. So we're all sitting there at 3 a.m. on the floor in Dallas-Fort Worth Airport trying to find a hotel. And they gave me a voucher. Oh, we're American Airlines. We'll give you a nice voucher. This is the worst hotel I've ever been in.
Right. And when you have a hotel for like 4 hours, what's the point?
Yeah, so I did a 3 hour. I remember the Ram sleep break, 3 hours. And I woke up, the sun was coming up. I thought, okay, and that kind of worked. There you go. All right, last subject on the lifestyle front of longevity. Marriage, being in a partnership, having friends, having social circles, doing things with other people, that kind of thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So social isolation and loneliness have both been associated with higher mortality rates. Marriage appears to carry a survival benefit, but the apparent detrimental effects of social disconnection and bereavement appear to be mediated by substance abuse, alcohol, tobacco, crappy food, very similar to stress. So the reason why people with higher stress tend to live shorter lives is because when we get stressed, we not only eat more, we eat worse food, we eat more sugary foods, we eat fattier foods, and we're more likely to smoke, more likely to drink. And if you peel away those factors, the good news is that stress and social disconnection do not appear to be independent risk factors for cutting one's life short, but it appears to be mediated through those lifestyle factors. So if we can be stressed and grieving and still maintain a healthy lifestyle, we should not suffer disproportionately. But unfortunately, what tends to happen is people just kind of go down the rabbit hole and don't take care of themselves.
Right. Christakis did that research on social contagions, where smokers tend to be friends with other smokers, and overweight people tend to have overweight friends, and so on, that the people you choose to be around, if they have healthy lives, in other words, it's not magic, it's kind of a changing your norms based on the people you're hanging out with and what their norms are for lifestyle.
Right. So it's changing your environment, right? Making the healthy choice, the easy choice, surrounding yourself by healthy food, healthy people, healthy factors. Yeah. And that's how we're gonna win. That's how we're gonna beat our genes, which is, we survived in a context of scarcity. So of course there was no salt shakers on the. Of course we had that craving for salt, craving for caloric density, craving for sugary, fatty foods, because our whole body evolved in scarcity, and now we're dropped in the land of plenty. And so, obesity is a natural, normal reaction to this abnormal, unnatural situation of being surrounded, drowning in a sea of excess calories. And so what do? Well, we just have to, control our environment as much as possible and kind of beat our genes and make it easier for us to do the right thing.
All right, Michael, we're right at 2 hours. Here it is, How Not to Age, the scientific approach to getting healthier as you get older. And if you're a baby boomer like me, you got to read this book. Oh, my God. Thank you so much for giving so much time to me. I really appreciate it. And
thank you so much. It's been an honor to be on.
All right. Great.